Hello again there, Year 10. I hope you're still doing well. Today we're going to do, today I'm going to upload 2 history lessons for this week. Now they're both going to be uploaded at the same time, but I would really strongly encourage you to try and spread them out. To do one of the lessons at the start of the week and the other one at the end of the week. Because if you do that, you're spreading out your learning, you're having to think about your history topic over a longer time, and it's going to help you to build that longer term memory in a much more effective way. So this is your first lesson where I'm going to introduce quite a bit of new information for you. Then the second lesson, which you're going to do later in the week, is going to get you thinking about the information in this lesson, analysing it and consolidating it so you remember it for a really long time, hopefully. Now, as always, you've got this video to watch where I'm going to be talking you through some things, giving you information and setting you up to do some activities. As well as the video, you should see in Google Classroom this document here. Mine's just taking a second to load. Now this document allows you to type your answers and your work straight into those grey boxes, which you can submit through Google Classroom. As I've said before, the easiest way to do that is to play this video maybe through a tablet, a television or a phone, and then have the Google Sheets document open on your computer to type straight in. You can, however, if it's not possible to do it that way, you can do all the activities separately on paper, then just take a picture of them and submit them into Google Classroom for your teacher to see. As always, any problems or any concerns with any of this, just drop your teacher an email and we'll do what we can to support it. Now we're going to start with the start quiz as always. So you've got 9 questions. It's a bit of a shorter start quiz, this one. Pause this video now and answer as many of those questions as you can from memory. Excellent, so let's go through the answers. Now, even if you're doing this on a computer, I still want you to self-check and correct. So if you're doing it on a computer, change your font to green or grab a different colour pen on paper. Let's self-check and correct these answers. So number 1, the answer was the monarch is the name for the head of an Anglo-Saxon government. 2 is aristocracy, the upper levels of Anglo-Saxon society. 3 is slaves, and 10% of Anglo-Saxon England were slaves. 4 is the earls collected tax for the king, and the Anglo-Saxon earls were allowed to keep 1/3 of that tax, which made them very wealthy. They also managed the fyrd and the thens within their earldom, and they also made sure people followed laws within their earldom. The best way to think of an earl is they were essentially the main ruler of an earldom. They were in charge of it, and they helped control it for the king. 5 is the witan. 6 is swear an oath of loyalty. 7 is a burh, and check your spelling on that, it's B-U-H-R. 8 is a shire reeve. And 9 Anglo-Saxon witans were selected by the witan. Anglo-Saxon kings were selected by the witan, and they would normally choose a family member. Make sure you've self-checked or corrected all those answers. Okay, now before we jump into today's lesson, I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you first. The first one is this. Question A. What would an Anglo-Saxon think of William after the Battle of Hastings? Now, if you're doing this in the document, you've got a question box for you to do it there. Answer your question straight into that grey area next to question A. If you're doing it on paper, then write it down in a full sentence. What do you think an Anglo-Saxon would think about William after the Battle of Hastings? You can choose one or a few of those words I've given you there on screen, or you can come up with your own. I then would like you to explain why they would think that. And try and stretch yourself with a however sentence as well. Pause this video now and answer the question. Thank you. Now, hopefully your answer that you've written out just there would have these sorts of ideas that William's going to be concerned, that Anglo-Saxons are going to dislike William. William was a foreigner. He'd come from Normandy. He'd killed the Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson. William had killed many Anglo-Saxons when he was committing atrocities in Wessex. And many people would have been very unhappy that they've got this new foreign king. And it meant that they were only submitting to him, they were only making him king out of fear. They were doing it because they had to. Their old king had been killed, and Edgar the Atheling was not going to be tough enough to stand up to William of Normandy. So an Anglo-Saxon would be really, really unhappy, or would probably even, you could say, hate William of Normandy for that invasion. Now, the next question of a similar vein for you is this. Question B. What would William think of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy after the Battle of Hastings? What would William think of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy after the Battle of Hastings? Pause this video now and answer question B. Excellent. Now, it's likely that William would have had concerns about the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, but he would also have needed them. The Norman invaders now had to try and control all of England, and it's impossible that William could have done that by himself as one man. William was going to need help from the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. So in some ways, he needed them to help him control England. In other ways, however, William would have been worried about them, because as we mentioned in the last question, the Anglo-Saxons would have hated William. So it's very likely that the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy wouldn't accept their new Norman king. Maybe the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy would try and rebel against William. So he was also concerned and worried about them as well. And this kind of sets up, this thinking that you've been going through there, the lesson that we're going to look at today in the main inquiry question, which is this. How does William establish his control of England from 1066? Because as soon as William gets that crown, the game isn't over. And it's very, very likely that many parts of England are going to be unhappy, they might rebel, and they aren't going to do what William wanted them to do first time, every time. So William needs some different strategies and techniques and tactics to help him control this country he's just taken over. Now, today's lesson, the new information, the way it's going to work is I'm going to lecture you through and explain some information. As I'm lecturing you through and explaining information, I'd like you to be taking notes. Now, if you're doing this in the Word document, taking notes is really easy. You've got a copy there of the images I'm going to be talking you through. You can take your notes there on the right in the area, that's great. If you're doing it on paper, you can either print out that document and write it in, or you can just take your notes on paper, maybe draw simple images like the ones I'm showing you to help you remember that information as well. But one way or another, you've got different ways you can take notes and submit it at the end. After I've explained and lectured you on the chunks of information, there are then some check-in sentences. So these tables are here in the document. The sentence starters I'm going to give you on screen, and it's going to be asking you to write full sentences using the information I've explained to you. So I'm going to explain, then I'm going to get you to think about it in a few summary sentences. So can you get ready to take notes now? I'm going to explain the first part of the information in today's lesson, all about how William established control of England from 1066. Can you get ready to take your notes? Now, everything William did, pretty much, to take control of England fully after 1066, can be broken down into two categories. On the one hand, William did do some things to try and get the loyalty of the Anglo-Saxon people. He wanted them to be loyal to him because they liked him. And he wanted to be able to control them because they wanted to do what he wanted them to do. He wanted to get the Anglo-Saxons on side and view him as a gracious king. However, William also did a lot to use fear. And he did try and keep the people of now Norman England scared of him. because he knew if he was tough, if he had a strong military, and if the people were afraid of the strength of William and the Normans, then they wouldn't challenge him, or they'd be less likely to form a rebellion. So most of the things I'm talking you through in today's lesson will fit into one of those two topics. Either getting loyalty of the people and then wanting to do what William wants them to do, or making the people afraid of him. Now, on last week's lesson, I spoke to you about this event here. The submission of the Earls at Berkhamsted. I'm just going to put some key spellings and keywords on the board for you today, or on the screen for you today, so you can check you're getting the key things down. Now, the submission of the Earls at Berkhamsted, this was where Edgar the Atheling, Edwin and Morcar, those two Earls, as well as Archbishop Stigand and Archbishop Ealdred, all met William of Normandy and gave him the crown of England. He was surrounding London, he was committing atrocities, they thought they had no other choice, and as you can see in the picture here, William was given the crown. Now from this point, William has eliminated all the other contenders to the throne. There's nobody else who's claiming that they should be the rightful King of England. But as we mentioned earlier, there are still people who are unhappy, who don't want him to be king, and are going to start challenging him perhaps, and not giving him that full control of the country. So William starts doing a few different things. The first thing he does is he makes a decision to try and earn the loyalty of many of the Anglo-Saxon earls who are left. Now the Godwinsons have been killed. They were killed at the Battle of Hastings. So like Earls of Wessex as well as other earldoms, as well as Tosti Godwinson, a man who had been Earl of Northumbria before, he's been killed as well. So William has got certain positions that he needs to fill. But many of the Anglo-Saxon earls are still alive. As we mentioned, Edwin and Morcar are still alive. Now William decides to allow many of the Anglo-Saxon earls to keep their job. Edwin and Morcar remain as earls. And William keeps them because he knows they've got some expertise. He knows people like Edwin and Morcar know about England, they know about its people, and if they help William, then it'll allow William to be a better king because he's got people who know what they're doing on his side. It also makes William look like a legitimate king, because if Anglo-Saxon members of the aristocracy are supporting him, then other Anglo-Saxons are more likely to follow those leaders. And in fact, William did certain things to try and earn the loyalty of the Earls of England. For example, William appointed an Anglo-Saxon to be the Earl of North-Northumbria. And he chose somebody called Gospatrick to be the Earl of North-Northumbria. Now he could have appointed a Norman, but actually he thought it made more sense to try and get the loyalty of the people and to appoint somebody who would have known what they were doing. William also tried to get the loyalty of Edwin by telling Edwin that he could marry William's daughter. Now this would have made Edwin a member of the royal family, and in theory would have allowed Edwin to be more loyal to him. William also allowed the two archbishops who gave him the crown to keep their roles as well. So Stigand and Ealdred, the Anglo-Saxon leaders of the Christian Church, were allowed to remain in their positions. Now the reasons why he allowed them is because archbishops were really important religious leaders, and the people of Anglo-Saxon England were really likely to follow the advice of the archbishops. So, if he keeps them in role, if they work with him to rule England, then again, it's more likely that the Anglo-Saxon people are going to follow him. He's going to have more legitimacy. Now, there were problems with this plan. Not everything William did would have got him the loyalty of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. Now, many of them were already, he couldn't have done anything to win them round because they hated him for killing King Harold Godwinson and attacking England. Many of them hated him even more because he increased the taxes when he took over. Now, when William won the Battle of Hastings, many of his soldiers were mercenaries. Now, a mercenary, if I can spell it right, a mercenary, if you remember, is somebody who doesn't fight for an army because they're loyal to the king. They fight for the army because they're being paid. And many of William's soldiers had joined his invading force because he promised to pay them. And now that they defeated the English, he has to pay them. And one of the ways he gets money to do that is by raising taxes and charging the Anglo-Saxons the money which he then gave to the European invaders. He also used some of the treasure that he had taken from the royal treasury in Winchester. Last week I explained that William stole all of the English treasure and he used some of that to pay the mercenaries. He also sent some of that treasure to the Pope, and he wanted to thank the Pope for supporting him in the Battle of Hastings and giving him the papal banner. Now, the problem with all this is it made many of the Anglo-Saxon earls dislike William even more, because not only had he taken over by force, but he's also now sending much of Britain's wealth or England's wealth abroad. Right, excellent. Now that's your introduction. That's the main kind of first bit of information I need to give you. Now I'd like us just to hit pause and do a little bit of a check-in. Now there are 4 sentence starters there which summarise the information I've just explained. What I'd like you to do now is in that check-in box in the document or on your paper, can you type out that sentence starter and finish it off? If you need to review your notes, all the information I've just given you, and I do want you to write out the start of it because that's going to help you have a good practice at writing developed sentences. Don't just write the end of it, write the bit that's on screen as well. I'd like you to now pause the video and finish off all those check-in sentences. Pause the video now. Fantastic. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk to you in 2 more chunks about 2 more bits of information about things William did to take control of England. Again, as I'm talking you through this information, I'd like you to be taking notes on your sheet. Okay, right, so the first thing I'm actually going to talk to you about is not something William did, but something that describes what England was like before William took over. Now what you can see there on screen is a picture of an Anglo-Saxon burh. Now can we remember our key spelling of burh? It's B-U-R-H. Now the burh, remember, were the small settlement towns that people lived in Anglo-Saxon England. Now they were public, meaning normal people could go in and out of them. They had strong fortified walls, and they were mainly the bases of where the community was organised, where the Shire was organised. So many of them would have courts to find people guilty or not guilty of crimes. Many of them had markets, and it'd be kind of the centre of the Shire where people would go to trade. They'd be quite simple buildings as well, made from mostly simple materials like wood and straw. Now, when William takes over England, he starts to introduce something which he'd used in Normandy before. He starts to build Motte and Bailey castles. And it's these Motte and Bailey castles that helped him to control England. The reason why he built these new structures is so he could control the people more carefully. Now the Motte and Bailey castles come in 2 parts. The part at the top, on the hill, that small building there, I've boxed it off on the screen, you should be able to see it. That was the Motte. Motte spelled M-O-T-T-E. Now, the Motte was a military building on the top of a hill surrounded by a wooden fence. Now, the wooden fence was known as a palisade. And again, I'll type that word for you on the board. The palisade was the wooden fence surrounding the Motte. Now, the Motte was a strong wooden tower that was really easy to defend from. Anybody attacking it would have to march up the steep hill. They'd also have to get over the wooden fence. Because it was on a hill, the Normans would be able to see anybody going to attack the Motte and Bailey Castle from a distance, because they'd be able to see very, very far away. And in fact, many of these mottes, many of these hills were actually man-made. They'd be kind of dug, they'd be constructed out of dirt dug from the ground, and they'd be sometimes up to 5 to 7 metres high. They were, in some cases as well, quite defended, and so they were quite well defended in terms of the different methods they were used. The outsides were often covered by wetted animal skins. And by putting on these soaked animal skins, it meant that they couldn't be attacked by fire. One common way to attack an enemy at these times is to kind of set their building on fire, maybe by setting an arrow on fire and firing it through the air at the building. Well, these wetted animal skins would make it really, really hard to set these buildings on fire. So if a Norman army in England was under attack, the Motte would be a really safe place for them to go. Now, the bottom part of this structure is obviously known as the bailey. Now, the bailey was the outer part of the castle. It's where the buildings would be things like stables and places for the Norman soldiers to live and sleep. It would also be surrounded by the palisade, and it would also be surrounded by a moat. M-O-A-T. Now, the moat was a ditch that was dug, making it harder to get into it, often filled up with water, meaning that any attacker in heavy armour or carrying heavy weapons would find it very, very difficult to get through that water without sinking and drowning. Now, access over this moat was controlled by a drawbridge, which did allow people in and out when they needed to. And all of this structure of the Motte and Bailey Castle would be a very, very strong military base for the Normans. Now, these military Norman bases, these Motte and Bailey castles, would be built near, would be built near important strategic locations. So, for example, they'd be built near crossroads, they'd be built near main towns, they'd be built near river crossings. Anywhere that William needed to control, any location that he needed to control so that he could control the people, he would try and build a Motte and Bailey castle. Now, in total, he built over 500 castles in Norman England. They'd be built relatively quickly. They'd take about 4 to 9 months to build. And in fact, he built 500 of them. He tried to get them 32 kilometres apart. And the reason why he tried and build them 32 kilometres apart is because that was the distance a Norman army could march in one day. So this meant that no matter where they were in England, if there was a rebellion, if there was a Motte and Bailey castle 32 kilometres away from it, then the Norman army could get to that rebellion within one day and try and stop it. Now, as you can imagine, these Motte and Bailey castles were really unpopular things for Anglo-Saxon people. Often, Anglo-Saxon buildings had to be destroyed in order to make space for the Motte and Bailey castles. But also, these mottes could be seen for miles around. which meant Anglo-Saxon people had this really common reminder that they'd been invaded. It was very hard to kind of, look around the distance, not see a Motte and Bailey castle and not be reminded that a foreign invader has taken over the country. So these Motte and Bailey castles made William much more unpopular than he already was with Anglo-Saxon people. Excellent, so that's my information I've got for you for Motte and Bailey castles. Again, you've got to check in a very similar way. You've got a handful of sentence starters. I'd like you to use the information I've just talked you through to finish off those sentence starters in as much detail as possible. Again, make sure you write out the start of the sentence so you've got that well-developed sentence and you've got your notes and your thinking down on paper. Pause the video now and complete these sentences. Excellent. Myself and your teachers look forward to reading those sentences when we look at your work and seeing the good stuff you've been doing. Right, we've got one more bit of information to talk you through, the last bit, and I'm going to talk you through what William did to change the system of earldoms. Now again, I'm going to start by telling you about Anglo-Saxon England. I'm going to explain what earldoms were like before William took control. And the map you can see there on the screen is the earldoms that existed before William's invasion. You've got Northumbria, you've got Mercia, which we've mentioned before, as well as Wessex. Now these earldoms were large areas, and each earldom contained many, many shires. And because these earldoms were so large, the earls who were in charge of it relied on loyal thegns to help them control the people. Now, when William took over England, he saw these huge earldoms as being difficult to control. And he thought if he had smaller and smaller earldoms, it would be much, much easier for the people there to be controlled. So what William starts to do is he creates these new marcher earldoms. There you go, I've typed it on screen so you know how to spell it. And if you take a look here at this map, you can see 3 marcher earldoms that William created on the border with Wales. At the top, you've got the earldom of Chester, then Shrewsbury, then Hereford. And I'll put those 3 names of those marcher earldoms on screen so you can spell them correctly. Now these marcher earldoms, as you can see from that map, were much, much smaller than a typical earldom. And they were smaller because William thought that would mean they'd have less people in them and they'd be much easier to control. He also then started to appoint Normans who'd invaded England with him to be in charge of those marcher earldoms. So for example, and this is a great key name if you can remember this, a man called Roger de Montfort, de Montgomery, was made the Marcher Earl of Shrewsbury, and the Earl of Hereford was a man called William Fitz-Osbern. Now, I'm going to talk to you about William Fitz-Osbern quite a lot over the next couple of weeks or months, so definitely remember his name. William Fitz-Osbern was one of William's most loyal followers, one of the people William trusted the most in the world, and he was made Earl of Hereford to help William control the people there. Now, William gave these marcher earls special privileges. He gave them special rights, special powers, which a normal earl didn't have. For example, the marcher earls paid less tax than a normal earl. Now this meant marcher earls could become very, very wealthy, and it also meant William could tempt more Normans to move to England to become marcher earls, because they knew if they became a marcher earl in England, they'd become very, very rich. But also, if they were becoming very, very rich, they'd be able to build lots of Motte and Bailey castles and build lots of markets. And William gave these marcher earls more power than normal earls to build Motte and Bailey castles and markets. In Anglo-Saxon times, an earl needed the king's permission to build a castle, because the king might be worried that that earl was going to maybe rebel or attack the king. But because William was appointing Normans to be marcher earls, he wanted them to spend their money on building lots of Motte and Bailey castles, because then they would help him to control the Anglo-Saxon people. He also gave marcher earls more power over laws in the marcher earldoms. In a normal Anglo-Saxon earldom, there would be shire reeves working there for the king, controlling some of the laws. William said to the marcher earls that there wouldn't be any shire reeves in the marcher earldoms, and if there were shire reeves in there, they'd work for the marcher earls, not for the king. And William did this because it meant that the marcher earls would be able to crush revolts and deal with criminals and rebels much more quickly than if it had to go to the king every time. All of this is about helping him to control the people and setting up a system of government that will crush revolts and keep the people afraid. It gave him more control, and it allowed him to persuade more loyal Normans to come to England. It as well allowed him to reward his followers. Those people who helped him to win the Battle of Hastings were almost getting a prize. They were being rewarded now that England was being controlled. So it was very much a win-win. Excellent. So that's everything I've got for you at the moment about marcher earldoms. Again, can you now please pause this video and finish off these check-in sentence starters? Again, remembering to write out or type out the start and using the notes about what I've just given you to fill in the information. Pause this video now and finish all of those sentence starters. Fantastic, right, so last bit then here today is I said at the start of today's lesson that the main inquiry question was this: how does William establish his control of England from 1066? I also told you in some ways he used loyalty and in some ways he used fear. Now what I'd like you to do on that table or on your paper is a box for you. I'd like you to type down everything William does to make the Anglo-Saxon people fearful of him so that he can control them. Then in V, what's everything he does to get loyalty so that the people want to do what William asks them to do, and then he gets control of them. And then once you've done both of those in as much detail as possible, can you answer the question in W? Does William use fear or loyalty the most when trying to first control England? Why? Is he mostly going for fear or mostly going for loyalty? And why do you think that? Why is that the thing he's chosen? That last one should be a good few full sentences explaining in full and proving it with knowledge to try and convince whoever's reading it you're right. Excellent, right, some really good work there today. I'm really looking forward to reading through it. Like I said at the start of the lesson, your next lesson for this week will also be posted on Monday, but try and have a bit of a break. Try and have a little bit of a gap between your lessons so you've got time to start to forget the information before you recap it next lesson. I'm also going to put any stretch activities on the next lesson. So if you're looking to stretch your understanding and go a bit deeper in your understanding of Norman England, look out for those stretch activities in the next lesson. As always, if you've got any questions about the work you've been completing, email me or email your teacher. Remember to click hand in on Google Classroom, otherwise we can't see your great work. And make sure you're getting some fresh air, make sure you're breaking up your work with some good breaks as well. If you need anything, get in touch. Thank you for your hard work today.